Why was it so good? I don't usually ask myself this question after watching something. I simply consume the content, perhaps reflect on the story or characters after finishing it, and I don't really think about the writing, acting, editing, or execution. But then I watched Solo Leveling and it was bad. Whenever it was brought up, I shared my opinion on it, and for the first time people asked me, why? I gave them a simple answer, but then I went back and I reflected on my view. What makes anime like Naruto or Demon Slayer so much better at doing the exact same thing as Solo Leveling? Why was the execution so much better, and what makes good anime or good cinema in general? I'll explain some screenplay concepts that are commonly used in all sorts of cinema. Solo Leveling will be my example of bad execution, while I compare it to anime that, in my opinion, pulled off the exact same concepts much better. Let's talk about the first issue that stood out to me. Exposition is when you're told what you need to know for a story to make sense. In screenwriting, there's a concept of show don't tell, where people are encouraged to present their information in a more realistic, engaging way, sometimes through the use of visual storytelling rather than just basic narration or bland dialogue. Some fans of the show might say that they don't really care about any of this stuff, the writing, the characters, the complexity. They only really want to see the cool action scenes and the fight sequences, as well as the power spikes and level up aspect, but don't worry, we're gonna get into that after this section as well. Let's take a look at the first episode of Tokyo Ghoul to see how it's done properly so you can get some perspective. We see a helicopter pursuit with dramatic music. The operator mentions multiple reports of a ghoul rampage and calls all units to the location. We then see a female ghoul indulging in a very human-based diet. Then, two ghouls engage in a fight and show off their superhuman abilities. In the next scene, we hear the news channel reporting on the previous night, saying that there were many unidentified male bodies. The people in the room pay attention. It's something that they're used to hearing about, but it still worries them, giving us an idea of how ghouls are seen in the society. Then we're introduced to two friends talking in a cafe. Right off the bat, we can see that one of them is energetic and extroverted, while the other one, our main character, is a shy, well-dressed, nerdier individual with an interest in books. This is reinforced by his choice of meeting in a cafe and talking about his plans to go on a bookstore date later. His friend leaves, and then the girl that he has a crush on walks in and sits down and starts reading. As they both read, he looks at her, and without saying a word, their facial expressions and gazes tell us everything we need to know. He likes the author or book that she's reading and is excited to talk to her about it, but is too shy and scared to approach her. Her warm smile reassures him that it's alright, and he ends up walking over. They go on a date, and then afterwards she asks him to walk her home. They go in a quiet alley, and she turns out to be a ghoul. Now it's starting to make sense. She was the female ghoul that was seducing different young men in order to feast on them. She attacks and chases him, and he ends up cornered. Some large building materials fall on them, obliterating the ghoul. As he's hallucinating about swimming and merging with the ghoul, there's background speech that tells us that he's currently in the ER in critical condition and is about to get an organ transplant. He then wakes up with the eye of a ghoul. He's unable to eat hospital food, pointing out that something doesn't feel quite right. He stares blankly into the floor for a few hours after getting home, with the TV on, with the same news channel that was talking about ghouls earlier. He doesn't seem to be too interested in it. Then he hears that ghouls are unable to eat normal food and that they have to consume humans in order to get nutrition. He's horrified. He immediately runs to his kitchen, tries to eat food, but is almost unable to until he forces himself and then immediately throws up. He then desperately tries other forms of food and repeats the cycle. He goes outside, he craves the humans around him, and he can't believe it. He feels disgusted with himself and he's scared. He goes back home and he sees his ghoul eye and he just sits on the floor defeated. We learned so much from this, even though a very small amount of the exposition came from dialogue and characters talking to the viewer themselves. In fact, almost everything was presented to us outside of the characters talking, with their speech only complementing the narrative rather than building it. We understand the concept of ghouls, how society sees them. Everything fits into a narrative that is given to us in short pieces. The characters, while also being much more complex than in Solo Leveling, are showcased in a more immersive and well-written way. Now, imagine if this whole story was just told by the character talking to himself, or a dialogue in the beginning of the scene lasting a few minutes. Yeah, that would have been pretty bad. And that's exactly what Solo Leveling did. So let's take a look at Solo Leveling. We start off with a mostly pointless flashback that tells us that we're in a class-based RPG like Isekai. Then the narrator explains the concept of the world, gates, enemies, weapons, hunters, hunter rankings, awakenings, inability to level. Two characters have small talk. All we learn is that the curly-haired one wants to provide for his new kid, so he went back to hunting. This conversation serves no purpose. We learn that the main character is very weak, through dialogue. Then, through a very crude dialogue with no nuance, we learn that the healer girl cares about him. This could have been done with subtext or a lot more complex interactions, but instead it was made so that even a 5-year-old can understand their dynamic with no second thought. If you compare this level of subtext to Death Note or Freerun, it's embarrassing. We learn that the character is broke. because he tells us. Then quite an infuriating scene comes on screen. A veteran hunter explains to one of his men, which already knows everything that's about to be said, what people do with essence stones, how hunters make money. He's explaining the basic concepts of their society that both of them already know, for no apparent reason. The best part is that the person that he's talking to adds on to what he's saying multiple times, confirming that both of them already know everything that's being said. So, why is it being said? This is clearly an exposition dump with a dialogue that would make no sense in any realistic context just to inform the viewer. This is lazy and bad writing. Then, as if it's not already obvious, the girl tells him that she's worried about him, explicitly. The reason why he's fighting and needs money is to bring his mother out of a coma, but how do we know this? Because he tells us through a monologue. Then he draws the connection between risking his life and the sake of his family by once again telling the viewer directly through a monologue. You get the point. So far, all of the exposition was through on-the-nose dialogue. You might think that it gets better over time and they only did that in the first episode to introduce stuff, but nope. Every single thing explained in this entire anime is done through very badly written dialogue or just the main character talking to the audience. But there are some things that nobody knows, even the main character, so he has to go through a journey and find them out. So how does he learn these new concepts? Does he experiment and learn? Are they presented in a creative or thrilling way? No. They are literally spelled out to him through pop-ups. You can't make this shit up, like, really? The exposition in this anime just felt straight up insulting, as if they expect all of their viewers to have an IQ of 70 and are unable to deduce anything or understand subtext of any kind. Every single thing was spelled out and over-explained in every episode. There's also the concept of timing and mystery. The reason why anime like Jujutsu Kaisen or Made in Abyss are so good is because they put you in a world where you don't really understand what's happening, and it kind of feels like you're going on a journey with the main character and you're learning as you go. You get these small hints and you're supposed to draw your own conclusions and come up with ideas of what might be happening, and then later on they just get confirmed or a story just comes together slowly in smaller chunks. The problem with Solo Leveling is that you get a full explanation of the entire scene that's about to occur or the entire concept of the anime right in your face immediately without it being spread out in any way. It's not like dialogue exposition is bad, by the way. In fact, some shows with the greatest exposition like Breaking Bad, Social Network, Attack on Titan are very dialogue focused, and most of the story gets presented that way. The key difference is that it's spread out, it has much better dialogue, a well-written story, complex character arcs and plot twists, and that there's a substrate of complexity under the surface level dialogue, which occasionally it dips into. With Solo Leveling, everything is so superficial that it made it impossible to do that. The main character himself is completely one-dimensional and has no complexity, even though the entire show revolves around him, because every single other character is as follows. I serve no purpose, I exist to glaze the main character, or I challenge or doubt the main character just for him to have his cool moment. That's it, those are the only categories, and the characters have no individual identity outside of those. That's their only purpose. Now let's talk about the reason why some people say that Solo Leveling is good despite all of the things that I've said. Let's talk about what people actually wanted to see in it, and you already hear the music ramping up, so you know exactly what I'm going to be talking about. Some of the most popular anime share the same formula. There's a supernatural power in the world that can be used by humans or other creatures, and one's proficiency in using that power determines their level. This concept is explained early on during the anime, and it's an important aspect. The main reason people watch those anime is the same one that people enjoyed Solo Leveling, the power comparisons. In almost all of these, we're first shown that a human without special powers stands no chance at fighting. A weak power level user is almost useless, and a strong power level user is either a god or a weapon of mass destruction. The concept of seeing a very strong character and then a new one appearing that completely outclasses the previous one in every single way by a large margin is cool. In fact, these anime have the highest potential for cool scenes. Let's take a look at some examples. Jujutsu Kaisen, Solo Leveling, Demon Slayer, One Piece, Bleach, One Punch Man, Naruto, My Hero Academia, all of these anime follow the same formula. In this case, I'll use Jujutsu Kaisen as my example because it's extremely popular and it's also much shorter than the other ones. In Jujutsu Kaisen, there are curses, the bad guys, and then there's the sorcerers, which fight the curses. They're assigned ranks based on their strength. This is the case for pretty much every power-based shonen anime since it's a core element of it. In order to give us a sense of each character's power early on before we get used to the cast and the universe, the anime uses these as reference to compare characters without having to make them fight or die. In this case, there are grades 4 to 1, with sorcerers being slightly stronger than curse users of the same ranking, and then there's the special grade. Special grades are typically strong enough to annihilate a whole modern army of our world. Some of these special special grades can be millions of times stronger than other special grades though, so it's not like they're all the same level just because they fall in the same classification. Sukuna was the strongest sorcerer of all time. He never lost a battle and he killed his fellow sorcerers and curses. He terrorized the world over a millennium ago until eventually dying by natural causes while remaining undefeated. He made a pact that transfused his soul into his fingers as a step towards immortality, and since he had 4 arms, this meant that 20 fingers contained his soul. They were scattered all over the world as part of a strategic plan. One of them ended up near a school, which was found by a club of people passionate about the occult. This was Yuji's school. Some more stuff happens which culminates in Yuji eating the finger. Normally this kills people, but in his case he lived and he gained some of Sukuna's power with plenty of side effects. What matters is that this incident revived Sukuna. Yuji, our main character, is a prodigy of physical capacity. He can throw 5-kilogram Olympic metal balls like they're baseballs. He can run 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds. And he can punch holes through concrete. He already has superhuman strength. Before we go over the power comparison, keep in mind that all of these scenes lose a lot of nuance when summarized, and it's much cooler to see them when you watch the anime and you have all of the extra context and atmosphere. Unless you're talking about solo leveling. But with that being said, let's hop into it. Some curses manifest and they easily overpower his 2 friends. This is before Yuji ate the finger. Though he still has superhuman strength, so he jumps at the cursed spirit, and even with all of his strength, he's only able to distract it. If it weren't for the sorcerer that was there to one-shot the demon, he would have been eaten. This shows us that the average human is powerless even against a weak cursed spirit. The sorcerer then gets attacked by a stronger cursed spirit, which he can't defeat, and then Yuji respawns Sukuna by eating his finger. Sukuna defeats the demon and breaks a large chunk of the school by just flicking his wrist with no effort. This sets him as the strongest character that we've seen up until this point by far. And this is only a basic attack that he unleashed while being at 5% of his total strength because he only ate 1 finger out of 20. Then a new character is introduced and he's much stronger than Sukuna, pretty much just playing with him rather than fighting. This new character ends up being the strongest sorcerer that we know of, but in this scene he doesn't even need to manifest his power. We can see it through comparison by just him not even really fighting back and just playing around with Sukuna. The show has established the following power status: humans, cursed spirits, sorcerers. But then when a cursed spirit, which is even stronger than the sorcerer, appears, it changes the dynamic. Then when we see 5% Sukuna, he is by far the strongest and it changes again. And then when we see Gojo, it's completely off the charts. We still don't know their full power, we can only see what they've manifested so far, which is why the show gets much cooler later on when they start going all out and they start facing stronger enemies. This introduction isn't supposed to be very cool, it just gives us an idea of what power looks like at the small level in this universe. We get to see the strength of both curses and sorcerers from the perspective of a standard human which knows nothing about them. This perspective applies to all the non-sorcerer humans of their world as well as all the people from our world that haven't seen the anime. Now let's get to the part that makes this anime cool. Yuji gets recruited and trained by Gojo. He starts hunting cursed spirits and trying to retrieve some more fingers. On his first mission he fights some low-level curses and easily defeats them, showing them that while he's still new, he's not completely incompetent. Sometime later they are tasked with investigating a cursed site where they assume another finger lies. This is about to be the first scene where we have a big power comparison. After exploring, they start arguing over what to do with the body they found. There's unsettling music playing throughout this whole scene. Nobara tells them to stop arguing and the music stops, but she keeps talking. She falls into the shadow realm and then both of them are confused. We expect Yuji to be confused, but Megumi is the one that's supposed to know what's going on since he's already a sorcerer, so when he starts to get confused and panic, we know it's about to get serious. And he does. He's confused and worried as to why his dogs didn't alert the presence of a curse that just pulled her in, since normally they would have alerted him immediately. At this point we sit in complete silence with no more loud speech, music or fighting. He looks over and he sees the head of one of his dogs embedded inside of a wall. He immediately assumes great danger. Itadori, we're running. We'll look for the girl later. They freeze in fear as the creepy music starts playing again. All of these small details were added up to make a very suspenseful, tense and intriguing scene. They recognize the immense power of this curse and that they're pretty much powerless against it. The curse has a personality and enjoys seeing them suffer. It decides to play with Yuji, sending him flying through the walls and kicking him around even though he could have easily obliterated him in an instant. Yuji and Sukuna share the same body, but Sukuna doesn't have control whenever he pleases, instead he needs to be granted control by Yuji. Yuji wants to switch with him and ask him for help, but keep in mind that Sukuna is still the main villain and a horrible person, so he tells him that if Yuji tries to swap him out, he will ignore the cursed spirit and just kill his friends immediately. Yuji's buying time so that the other two sorcerers can escape. Megumi tells him that he'll release a signal once they're out, but there is no signal. This means that he can't swap out with Sukuna without killing both of them, and a lot more once Sukuna goes out of control or releases the cursed spirit into the city. He has to choose between the lives of countless people or his own, so he does exactly what we expect him to do, and he doesn't swap. His promises, his friends, his entire life and potential, his story, everything that's meant to come is over. One single mistake is all it takes to end everything. With all of these emotions, all of this inner strength and sheer willpower to live and carry on his duty, he channels everything he has and rushes at the cursed spirit with a red flash of cursed energy wrapping his fist. He goes all out in the most meaningful action in his entire life, and then he does absolutely nothing. The cursed spirit catches his hand and laughs at his pathetic attempt. This isn't one of those children's movies where an emotional moment brings out something inside of a character and ends up in a miracle. This world is relentless. It's over. That's the signal. He switches. The spirit steps back and gasps, and now he's in the same state as the sorcerers when they first saw him. Horrified. Sukuna doesn't care enough to hurt the cursed spirit. In fact, he's so much stronger than it that he doesn't even glance at it once. Instead, tapping its shoulder and saying, "Let me think," as he tries to come up with a revenge plan for Yuji trying to use him as a puppet. He wants to break out the cursed spirit so that it can fight his friends directly. That way he doesn't risk Yuji taking back control of the body and holding him back again. The curse is shaking and in a state of a complete panic, and just like any irrational animal when it's cornered and scared, it tries to fight back, even though Sukuna wasn't even targeting him. It throws its strongest attack yet, and Sukuna blocks it without any sort of effort. The curse is flabbergasted. Sukuna doesn't let this one slide. He starts mocking the curse and enjoying himself without trying to kill it, basically playing with him, as he was with Yuji, showing an immense difference in power, even though Sukuna is only at 10% of his normal power currently. And then just for the sake of it, he does a
domain expansion. Get at the work.
And exorcises the demon. The reason why this is satisfying and even cool is because we get to see the difference in power. First, the sorcerers are a lot weaker than the spirit, and then the spirit is a lot weaker than the 10% Sukuna. This is a simple example of a scene that only lasts a few minutes. A much better one would be the scene of Tanjiro from Demon Slayer fighting an upper 12 spider. It's extremely similar and more fleshed out and even better written, and over 20 times longer. But I'm not gonna get into that one. This is partially seen in solo leveling as well, but the problem is that they're always fighting NPCs and brain-dead enemies, the whole thing being an RPG. Most of the enemies don't think at all, they don't have any sort of complexity or personality, they don't even go for any sort of outplays. They don't respond to their enemies or their attacks, they simply throw out their basic abilities over and over again. There's no suspense. They have no complexity, and neither do the characters fighting them. The power level is also incredibly linear, pretty much only focusing on their level rather than the different types of complex, powerful techniques, counters, creative combos, teamwork, backstory, context, or anything else. These sorts of scenes that work in Demon Slayer or Jujutsu Kaisen work so much better because of the characters and the backstory. In fact, the only reason this section is already 5 minutes long is because it takes a while to explain all of the relevant context. Not to mention how many important details I've skipped that make these scenes so much more impactful when you're watching them in the full anime. These details are important because they build the characters and they lead to much more impactful action scenes. In solo leveling, pretty much every cool scene is a "you thought I was weak but I'm much stronger" type situation. Sometimes you also see power spikes, like the main character unlocking a very strong ability or killing a strong opponent. And lastly, you have the so-called aura moments where they just stare at each other and he shows that he's not scared of the presumably stronger opponent because he knows that they're not actually stronger. The only real power comparison was established when this goofy insect killed many S-ranked hunters easily, showing off that it's much stronger than any S-rank. And then the main character relatively easily defeated it. Pretty much all of the cool aspects come down to underestimating. The writing is pretty shallow and the characters are too one-dimensional to make any of these scenes too impactful. I would say that 90% of what makes these scenes cool is the amazing soundtrack. Let's see how Naruto pulls off the exact same concept without going into too much detail. Long story short, there's a ninja exam that lets them get a higher ranking, in which they compete in all sorts of challenges and fight each other. In the final 1v1 tournament, the contestants are Rock Lee, a character that doesn't even have any sort of magical power, in this case being chakra and jutsu, and simply relies on martial arts and physical strength in a world of ninja that can pretty much use magic. Gaara is the villain here, easily swiping away every opponent in the tournament since he's a demigod. He has the power of one of the 9 divine beasts living inside of him, making him one of the strongest characters that has been presented to us, even stronger than a lot of their teachers. At this point, Gaara was stomping Rock Lee, it wasn't even close. Lee's teacher then allows him to take off some weights. Apparently, during this whole thing, he'd been wearing some weights on his arms and legs as part of his training. Rock Lee lights up when he hears the news and takes them off. Everybody looks at him thinking that it won't make a difference, since it's just a few extra kilograms and it wouldn't do anything in a fight against Gaara. And then, as the weights fall,
ガーラの砂についていけるわけが
they send the ground flying and reveal that he was wearing several tons. After that, he starts destroying Gaara. This is one of the most iconic scenes in anime, and it's how an underestimating scene is done properly. The fact that Gaara was a very serious character as well, and Rock Lee was more of a goofy individual and had more of a weak character archetype, this made us think that he is actually weak, so that also played a part in it. Now let's see how Jujutsu Kaisen makes its cool scenes.
部をわきまえろ。知れ者が。
Sukuna and Gojo are two gods that fight on separate sides. They are strong enough to change the balance of the world single-handedly. If all of the curses came together and tried to eradicate humanity, Gojo alone would single-handedly prevent that due to his immense strength, which is why they had to trap him rather than try to defeat him. Same can be said about Sukuna, which is why the Jujutsu Association did their best to prevent him from respawning. Both of them are arrogant and recognize their own strength. Their confidence tends towards hubris and their pride is unmatched. The coolest scenes in this anime come from Sukuna. He's feared by every character in the Jujutsu Kaisen universe except for Gojo. He's very strong and everybody knows it. In every instance of Sukuna appearing in front of a character, they are shook to their core. Let's take a look at some examples. Mahito has a power that lets him rearrange people's souls, altering their appearance and easily killing them with one touch. Sukuna's soul rests inside of Yuji's body. Kinda sus, but I digress. When Mahito expanded his domain, he was about to kill off probably the most beloved and relatable character in the show. A great teacher and ordinary man with realistic dreams. We get a flashback of his life as he accepts his fate. Then we learn that the domains are easy to break into from the outside, but hard to break out of as Yuji breaks in. But more importantly, one's domain touches the body as well as the soul of their enemy. So when Yuji's body entered, so did Sukuna's soul. "You dare touch my soul?" says none other than the most prideful and conceited of them all, Sukuna. With one simple swipe from his throne and minimal effort, he slices the strongest villain we've seen so far to an inch of his life. Another great scene is when a cursed spirit was feeding Yuji fingers to get Sukuna even stronger and maybe get him to take control of the body again. The spirit looks away, and then when he turns back, he realizes that his hand is no longer on his body. He was holding the face of Sukuna and lost his arm because of it. They all run against the wall in complete shock and fear as Sukuna points out that they hold their heads quite high. Two of the characters bow to the ground while the strong spirit only kneels. An immediate slash removes the top of his head in an instant without Sukuna even lifting a finger. He says, "You thought one knee was enough?" He didn't kill him because the spirit gave him multiple fingers, making him stronger and bringing him back, so he decided to hear him out. This is a tense and unpredictable scene. Two girls beg him to save somebody as they offer a finger as well, and their demand disrespects Sukuna, so he drops them without any effort. The strength difference, and even more importantly the reactions and the view of other characters around him, make these scenes very cool. An example is this scene, where he appears out of nowhere as people are fighting, and there's a literal asteroid about to crash on them. The second he appears, everybody freezes immediately, and he tells them that they're not allowed to move until he claps, playing with them for his own amusement. Then, right before the asteroid hits, he claps and everybody scatters. Gojo does the same thing in a fight, where he randomly appears out of nowhere and he clears up the skies, flying over everybody, and then later on releases a blast so strong that for hundreds of meters it clears every bit of matter and goes through plenty of land and structures. These characters randomly appearing in these scenarios and changing the entire dynamic of the fight just shows how incredibly strong they are. But so far we're only told about their strength, and that while only at a fraction of their power, they are gods and weapons of mass destruction, feared by all, but we don't really see it. The strong characters never go all out since there's no reason to. They are far too strong compared to the rest of their opponents, until they finally do. They go all out, and this leads to the coolest scenes we've seen so far. Megumi has a special clan ability that lets him tame monsters that he summons and defeats, meaning that he has to be stronger than what he summons. The highest level summon possible is the Divine General Mahoraga, a beast that has never been tamed. If he summons this creature, It's pretty much a guaranteed death for him and whoever is inside of the ritual. He can also bring another person into the ritual and they can try to defeat it together, although this doesn't tame the creature, so it's mostly seen as pointless. Megumi uses this mechanic as a trump card. If he's about to be defeated and he stands no chance to survive the encounter, he can summon the Divine General and put himself as well as the enemy in the ritual. Normally, a strong enemy should just be able to defeat this summon, but Mahoraga is incredibly strong. So strong that he can only be defeated by about 4 characters in the entire Jujutsu Kaisen universe, 2 of which are not even shown in the anime. This means that once Megumi summons Mahoraga, it's over for both him and his opponent, unless he's one of the 4 characters that can defeat him. Maybe 5 or 6, I haven't read the manga. This is presented multiple times throughout the anime, as Megumi is about to lose, but he never ends up summoning him. One time it's completely over for him, and he stands no chance at fighting his enemy. So he finally summons the general. This absolute unit easily decimates both of them. Sukuna was forced to make a vow with Yuji in which he promised to guarantee the safety of some of his friends, and this was one of them. As he was roaming the streets, he sensed the presence of Mahoraga and realized what happened. Even the lead up to this fight is very cool, as Sukuna casually walks in, and we know that 2 of the 3 strongest characters that we've seen so far are about to fight. While only being at half of his power, he exhibits what he can do when he actually tries to fight a very strong opponent, and he's close to going all out. Mahoraga is the strongest character in the show in terms of physical strength and endurance. He has a special ability that allows him to become immune to any technique as long as he's tanked it once. Sukuna realizes that he has to combo some of his strongest attacks and in the process destroys an entire city in an outstanding, unhinged display of strength. Then there's the power comparisons. We have Jogo. This character doesn't really do much for most of the anime, and there was a fight with Gojo in which he gets backed up while Gojo displays minimal effort and mostly plays around. So we assume that this character is weak. That is certainly not the case. We have a pretty strong main cast as well, which consists of special grade sorcerers. The anime develops their strength and standing for about 2 seasons at this point. Jogo literally kills half of the main cast of special grade sorcerers within a few seconds with minimal effort. He's incredibly strong. This was a testament to how powerful Gojo is as well, since he easily defeated Jogo earlier in the anime without even really trying. Then Sukuna decides to play around with Jogo. As they fight, they destroy the entire city around them and show off immense strength, but obviously Sukuna wins. Then we have Gojo, pretty much the same story as Sukuna, but he's much nicer and playful in a less sadistic way. He fights for humanity's side and is generally seen as the hero, though still retains his humanity. Many heroes are incredibly boring and one-dimensional, doing the so-called right things, refusing to kill people out of principle, and being very predictable and not particularly realistic. Gojo displays a more complex character. He knows that he's incredibly strong and he can alter society all by himself. Whenever he completely disagrees with the upper management that runs the world, he says, maybe I should just kill all of the higher-ups. When the girl he was escorting dies in transit and afterwards he sees a bunch of zealots celebrating her death, he's disgusted. And so is his partner. He subtly says, we could kill them all if you want. His partner says there's no point. The association will collapse soon anyway. Then Gojo says, does there need to be a point? Even though they were just powerless humans. This gives us Homelander vibes, but as the hero. The best display of this is when Gojo had finally had enough of the cursed spirits bullshit and he goes on a rampage. With an insane look in his eyes, he starts pushing one of them into a thick concrete wall just by casually walking up and using his force field, crushing his opponent. One of the other spirits tries to save her by saying, look over here, I'll kill all of these humans if you don't stop. But Gojo was unfazed, unlike other heroes, or our main character a few episodes ago when he didn't even want to kill transfigured humans, let alone real humans. Gojo just completely ignores that comment and doesn't care about the lives of a few people as he crushes his enemy with an insane look in his eyes. He was once almost defeated by being completely outplayed and outsmarted by a much weaker yet strong character. Gojo was weakened from a mission throughout multiple days and he's attacked right as he lets his guard down. He doesn't quite die despite being very badly damaged. He then comes back later after this near-death experience and he had a realization which helped him develop his new technique. At this point we thought he was dead, but he flies back in and says, throughout the heavens and earth I am the honored one, referring to how blessed he is to have that level of power. Then blows a hole through his opponent. All of these elements add more personality and realism to the character. They aren't just walking power meters. Then there's Toji and Yuta and all of the manga scenes, but I think you get the point. In Demon Slayer there are some cool scenes as well revolving around the power comparison between Demon Slayers, as well as the fact that demons are incredibly powerful and that humans are still just human. They train a lot and some of them are very strong, but they can't regenerate or use magic or come close to the strength of demons of the same caliber. The coolest scenes in the anime are not characters being extremely strong and being able to change the fate of the world with their strength, but rather demon slayers being able to go band for band with a literal demon. This fight in the entertainment district arc is amazing because it built up the villains for an entire season and showed off how strong they are. And then a demon slayer fights one of the top 6 strongest demons in their universe and holds his own in a 1v1 for a while. The animation, soundtrack, and emotional moments also make these fights a lot more meaningful. Naruto has its own fair share of cool scenes, but they're mostly impactful and emotional rather than focusing on being cool. Now that we've talked about what makes cool scenes in this sort of anime, let's take a look at the actual fights. If you were to crop a solo leveling scene completely out of context in short form content, it would still look cool despite you missing all of the context. In Jujutsu Kaisen, in a lot of those scenes, you think, what's happening? How did we get here? What are the characters? Who is this guy? What are they doing? I don't understand the battle system because it's a lot more complex. It's not just I'm higher level than you, therefore I do more damage than you, therefore I punch you and you die. It's more interesting. They simply feel like NPCs that you have to defeat in an indie game. They don't feel like real scary enemies that would be hard to deal with, rather just stat checks, which leads us to the next issue. So what does stat checking mean exactly? Well, let me show you. In bad anime, including solo leveling, you can shoot and you can block. The amount of damage you inflict with your shot depends on your power and the amount that you can defend on your defensive level. So you could just have 2 characters shooting at each other and whoever does more damage wins, which is what happens in solo leveling. This just means that the person with the higher stats will win because there's no elements of complexity. I just shoot at you, and if I do more than you do to me, I win. What many good battle shonen anime do is that they show you a more complex character with more complex techniques and they show you how they interact with other characters. Because it's not just about the pure power of your ability, the question is your ability even effective against your opponent? Do they have something that can counter it? And just so that I don't have to build up the whole context and spend a lot of time explaining different scenes, I'm just gonna use League as an example. If I show you this scene and you've never seen the game before, then you'll have no idea what's happening. This is the case for a lot of anime as well, where the fights are a bit complex and it's hard to know what's happening unless you're given some context, which is why they spend a lot of the time in the anime building the character's strength and explaining their powers. Sometimes because of the complexity of the character's techniques, they might need to explain it mid-fight, which happens a lot during Naruto and sometimes during Jujutsu Kaisen. Almost all of them give you some sort of context beforehand. So let me give you the context behind this outplay and show you how it's different from a stat check that you might see in solo leveling or other similar anime. Riven has a dash and a stun. She can combo them to make it faster. Or she can use a 5-minute cooldown flash to make it more unpredictable. Now you could just jump at an opponent and brainlessly spam your abilities, but this only works against target dummies and bots and doesn't really work against decent humans, because they're just gonna counter you. In fact, anime would be extremely boring if the enemies never really fought back. The entertaining aspect of fights is the fighting back and the back and forth and the counterplay. Let's see how that looks. This is Fiora. She has an ability that can parry. This means that if you stun her during the parry and the line hits you, you're gonna get stunned instead and you will not be able to move. In this context, this means certain death. So now we have all the setup that we need. We have 2 characters of similar power level, we establish their power and abilities, and we understand how their techniques interact with each other. If I engage with a dash stun, I can very easily get parried. I could flash the parry, but then I have no more mobility and it's too risky. Maybe dash in and bait the parry? No, it's better to flash in and make my opponent panic and instinctually parry.
Make a move then, cuz.
Oh no, he has the wings of Challenger. I need to go all out. EUNE breathing. Final form. Let's see how you parry this. Voila, he's scripting. I need to dash. What kind of monster are you?
You insolent master picker. How dare you challenge the goat? I have something special for your bitch ass.
Oh hell no.
Domain expansion. Lama fina, lama krima.
Can't keep taking these hits. He's going for the vital. Oh, I got you now. If I land my one-shot swipe, he's dead. Special technique. One-shot swipe.
You low-elos never fail to amaze me. There's one thing you fail to consider. I never used my flash.
Now imagine if instead it just looked like this. Oh boy, a weak enemy. Damn, I'm getting packed up.
Man, I'm dead.
Solo leveling doesn't have any outplays. The higher level character simply wins, and there's no strategic element. As if the characters didn't already lack complexity, now the action scenes do as well. Todo's clapping technique in Jujutsu Kaisen being used to trick stronger opponents with mind games. Kakashi countering Obito's power, which made him untouchable for most of the show by analyzing and using precise timings. Pretty much every Shikamaru scene from Naruto, since he's the weak character and constantly strategizes to outplay enemies. Demon Slayer opening scene where Tanjiro throws his axe and then pretends to run with it in order to trick a Hashira. There are many instances of characters outplaying much stronger opponents that they could never defeat with raw strength. This adds an element of complexity to the fight and makes you wonder what will happen, because it's not just about the level of the characters and the fights are not linear. When I see this guy in Naruto, I wonder what he does. I see that he's in the Akatsuki and that he already took out some strong opponents, but I haven't seen any fight scenes. This makes me curious. When I then see that he looks like this while fighting, I'm even more curious as to what he does and how he can be defeated. We're first presented with a character that we know nothing about, perhaps just their base strength. We don't know what abilities they use or if they have a one-shot mechanic that can kill people in one hit, which their enemies can only find out about once it's too late, or what their strengths and weaknesses are. We're clueless and we learn as the other characters do. The enemies are complex and smart as well. It's not just a bunch of NPCs and it's not just about the abilities, but rather how they choose to use their abilities in combat relative to their enemy. This is a recurring theme in Naruto and it's what keeps the fight scenes interesting. I learn what the character does by watching his opponents experiment with him and try to find out his abilities and risking their lives in the process. If they don't do everything right and properly analyze their opponents and then outplay them, they simply die. It's not just about running in and being physically stronger or using more powerful jutsu, since many opponents can nullify that strength and outright counter their moves, and one wrong action could lead to instant death. First, we learn about Hidan's immortality through a previous fight that Shikamaru lost against the duo. In that fight, he loses his teacher, a person that he's very close to, and he learns that Hidan can't die. But if he gets a drop of his opponent's blood, he can use a ritual to link his lifeline to the opponent and then stab himself in the heart, killing his opponent but keeping him alive as he's immortal. This is a very strong combo, and this character cannot be killed through any method. He will always stay alive and regenerate. His partner is also incredibly strong. Kakashi's team tries to defeat him, and in the process they learn that he's immune to physical attacks and that he has multiple hearts that can be replaced and regenerate. His summons are elemental and he has strong wires connecting his body and many other things. They learn this through trial and error and while risking their lives. It's entertaining to watch and understand as the viewer. But I won't go too deep into that because it's 5 episodes long and it mostly focuses with the battle with Kakuzu. Let's look at what Shikamaru does with Hidan instead. Shikamaru deduced that they can't fight both of them at the same time and that Hidan is a very deadly add-on but not that dangerous individually. He uses his shadow jutsu to link Hidan and get him to drop his sight and then makes both of them run away from the rest of the fight, seemingly without thinking of the direction. It looks like they just ended up in a random forest. Hidan then stabs him, getting blood on his blade, and at this point it's over for Shikamaru. It looks like all he did was sacrifice his life in order to stall for his team. Except that wasn't his blood. He swiped his opponent's blood during the fight, tricking Hidan into stabbing one of Kakuzu's hearts. Through this move he already got rid of a heart and separated the two, but it gets even better. This wasn't just a random location. This was the area that Shikamaru went to after the funeral to set up his trap. He then blows Hidan up and buries him underground, leaving him unable to regenerate properly or dig himself out, effectively being trapped forever. So, Shikamaru, one of the weakest characters in the main Naruto cast, and somebody that always works in a team because he's simply too weak individually, once again defeated an opponent that's much stronger than him through planning and strategizing. This bought enough time for the rest of the ninja to arrive to the scene and then save Kakashi and his team. If Shikamaru didn't outplay Hidan, they would have all died. If he wouldn't have lost someone dear to him in a previous fight with Hidan, he wouldn't have learned about his power, and then everyone would have been killed. If Kakashi wasn't as strong as knowledgeable, they would have all died. There are many factors that go into deciding who wins, and it makes the fights much more unpredictable and suspenseful. This anime is also not scared to kill off its main characters, which removes the plot armor and adds an element of unpredictability. This is a more elaborate example, but even the simpler fights are full of twists, strategy, and interaction between techniques. It's not just 1v1s where the level determines the outcome. There are also many scenes where small outplays and tactics don't even lead to victories. An example that comes to mind is Kakashi against Pain. Kakashi at the time was much weaker than Pain, but he was fighting him so he could protect his village. They tried to defeat Pain, and in the process they learned what his abilities do, though they were defeated. This goes back to my previous point. Characters need to find out how their opponents work, even if it means being defeated or dying. The characters are not simple or linear and can't be underestimated. In this case, Kakashi tries to outsmart Pain by planting a chain underground and using a decoy attack in order to distract and trap him. It doesn't work, and Pain kills Kakashi. They find out some important information about Pain's technique and how to counter it. It's very important that they deliver this information to the rest of the village so they can defend against Pain, otherwise they would all go the way of Kakashi. The fattest tries to run away and tell the rest of the village, but yet another body that Pain controls shot a missile at him. If Choji would have died here, everyone else would have as well, because by the time they would learn about Pain's technique through combat, it would be too late. Then it's revealed that Kakashi used his Sharingan spec to send the nail that Pain shot at him to another dimension and faked his death. He then saved Choji by also using his spec on the missile, allowing him to escape and snitch to the rest of the village. If Kakashi hadn't faked his death and then kept his ability secret, then everyone would have died. As you can see, Naruto's pretty entertaining to watch and fights are well designed. The world building and character complexity is also amazing, making us care about the characters and the story and getting even more immersed in the fights. Well, this one took a while to make. I had to cut out an entire section on Made in Abyss that took me about 4 hours to make, but you know, it'd be like that sometimes. Anyway, thanks for watching. You can also check out my other videos if you like this one. Maybe subscribe. I also stream on Twitch sometimes. I have a donation link as well. I guess have a nice day.